Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden. Where did we get to? Magic physical training 6. In this step, any special training of the body is no longer necessary, but we shall practically use all the occult powers which the scholar has obtained in the course of the exercises, provided he did follow all of the methods scrupulously and the practices did really become habits. The scholar can, of course, deepen the exercises to obtain a better success. It is impossible to describe the entire practice of magic which a scholar could master eventually, because it would comprehend another volume. I will only select some of the most interesting facts from the lot. In the meantime, the scholar has matured so much that he will succeed in the practice of lower magic without any exception, especially if he aims at high and noble ideals only. In contrast to thoughts living with their forms in the mental or spiritual sphere, the elementals are entities with a certain degree of intelligence deliberately created by a magician. Such elementals are capable of fulfilling certain tasks on the mental plane, and obviously they may be looked at as obedient servants of the magician, who can create for himself a whole flock of such servants according to the purpose he aims at. Through the creation of elementals of the so-called elemental magic type, the magician can accomplish everything in the mental sphere without any discrimination of his own or a strange sphere. I will only quote a few examples just because of the great variety. With the help of the elementals, the magician can influence the mind of any other person optionally. He can strengthen or weaken man's mental and intellectual faculties. He can protect himself or others against foreign influences, transmute friendships in animosities, or the other way around. He can produce a favourable atmosphere in associating with his fellow men, and he can bring under his control anybody's will which is not yet developed or profiled. The businessman can enlarge the number of his customers, and in many other ways the elementals can be a great help for him. The genuine magician will always be inspired by good and noble intentions and keep the altruistic motive in mind if he is aiming at the highest level of magical maturity. The practice of creating elementals is very simple and an affair of the magician's imagination, but the following rules must be considered. 1. The elemental has to be given a form corresponding to the desire one wishes to be fulfilled. The form is to be created by intensive imagination. 2. The form, the so-called vessel or housing, has to be given a name of some sort. Everything existing, whether in a particular shape or shapeless, it does say shapeless, or shapeless, does have a name. If it has no name, it does not exist. The task is to be impressed on the elemental with the help of the willpower and the imaginative faculty. That means an authoritative order has to be given with respect to the kind of effect to be produced. Here as well, the present or imperative form formula must be retained in exactly the same way as I did describe it in the chapter dealing with subconsciousness. 4. The effectiveness is to be impressed on the elemental, regardless whether it be question of a permanent or a restricted effect. These 4 fundamental rules are to be respected at any rate if one intends to work successfully with elementals. I will render the practice even more understandable, and an illustrative case may show how it can be done. Supposing the magician intends to enforce somebody's memory or any other intellectual faculty with the help of an elemental, the procedure is as follows. The magician imagines a large universal ocean of light, from the luminous matter of which he shapes an enormous ball of light, compressing and, hence, accumulating it more and more with the help of his imagination until this ball has the size of approximately 12 to 20 inches or 30 to 50 centimeters. By this accumulation of light, the ball has become similar to a radiating sun. Now the magician impregnates this light ball with the desire and the firm conviction that it will exhibit the same power and quality as is supposed to revive and reinforce the desired mental faculty, such as memory, eloquence, etc., in the respective person. As soon as the magician has shaped this mental sun or ball, he must give it a suitable name, say Lucis or the like. Besides, he is fixing the time when this ball is to affect the mental sphere of the person with terms like these. You ought to work in the mental sphere until the person concerned has attained the desired faculty in such a way that this faculty has become a habit. Having fixed the time, the magician orders the elemental to dissolve in and return to the ocean of light as soon as it has fulfilled its task. Expressing it magically, birth and death of the elemental are fixed in exactly the same manner as man's or any other being's fate is. Considering the fact that an elemental knows neither time nor space, it may be directed to the mental sphere of the respective person. Its sending off is happening quite suddenly, as if the connecting link between the own person and the elemental were torn. At the same moment, one turns to another job. One ceases remembering the elemental which has just been created. One may also accompany the breaking up with a certain farewell gesture, just as one did while creating it. All this is entirely left to the scholar's discretion, who, at his present state of development, should be quite capable to give such and similar instructions himself. The more detached from the magician such an elemental is, the more effective it will be in the mental sphere of the person for whom it was created. It can work independently in the mental sphere and will not be restricted in any way by the magician's mind. Now and again, it is advisable to reload the elemental to give it a greater power of expansion. This is achieved by calling the elemental by the name given to it, back from the mental sphere of the person concerned, rendering it more dynamic through a new accumulation of light, and sending it off again. As soon as the elemental has fulfilled the required task, it will dissolve itself in the ocean of light. This example should suffice to give the magician a rule of conduct how to create elementals. The experiment described here is very often used by adepts to the purpose of inspiring and strengthening scholars of a lower standard. Let us now turn to another rather similar topic which makes us acquainted with the so-called larvae. The difference between an elemental and a larva is basically the fact that an elemental is created deliberately by the magician, whereas the larvae form themselves involuntarily in the corresponding mental sphere as the result of a strong psychical excitement. No matter which kind of excitement this happens to be. The stronger the excitement is, the more mental material a person is subsiding, or the stronger, denser, and more viable the larvae will become, especially in the case of a regular and frequent repetition of the same psychical excitement. This involuntary formulation of larvae occurs in any human being, magically trained or not, young or old, intelligent or not, regardless whether the person knows or ignores it. If the psychical excitement is fading due to the fact that no attention at all has been paid to the upsetting affair, the larva too will disappear by and by until finally dissolving itself. Consequently, there will be in the mental sphere a constant bringing forth and dying of larvae, naturally at the cost of the mental matter of each human being. We are causing these events by our own psychical excitements. The reason, therefore, can be very different, usually fear, grief, sorrow, fright, hatred, and envy, and such like producing them. The shape which the larva shows depends on the cause of the psychical excitement, and is always symbolic. Anyone who knows something about symbolism will be able to get a clear idea about this problem. For example, a thought of love will always be symbolized by a heart, a thought of hatred, by an arrow or a flash, etc. In spite of the fact that the larvae, these undesirable mental inhabitants, cannot be seen by the normal human being, they do still exist, and the well-trained magician can perceive them on the mental plane. In sensitive or excitable persons, the mental matter is much more separable, and the reproduction of larvae is obviously easier and more intense. Such people wreck themselves, their health, especially their nerves, but they also damage their intellectual faculties and involve other highly suggestible people too. All kinds of mass psychosis are originating here. There is no need of describing mass psychosis in detail because everybody will have made his observations and experiences regarding this problem. Evidently, the larva is becoming all the stronger. The more one is returning to the cause of the psychical excitement and the more attention one is paying to it. Any larva being condensed very strongly will always show a great deal of self-preservation instinct and will try to prolong its duration of life as far as possible. For this reason, it stimulates the mind of the given person, trying at every opportunity to draw his attention to the cause of excitement and to revive it constantly. Such a well-fed larva can become fatal to a sensitive or emotional individual, and numerous mental disturbances such as persecution mania and similar are the result of it. How many people are living under the erroneous supposal to be haunted and destroyed by black magicians, whereas they are in fact victims of their own fancies, or putting it correctly, victims of the larva they have been creating themselves. People like these will usually find out all about this problem not before they have left their mortal frame. Only very few persons are actually haunted magically. Think of the numerous innocent Inquisition victims of the past. No doubt that there is a certain advantage for the average man in that the old order has changed, yielding place to a new one, for if a man's belief is bad, it will not be improved by burning. But one has thrown out the child with the bath water without touching on the roots of the matter and without verifying the higher laws. The magician will now realize why there has been laid such a stress on the importance of introspection, control, and mastering of the thoughts at the beginning of the practical part of this work. Supposing he did not get the thoughts under the control of his willpower, in the course of his development, he would unconsciously create larvae which might become fatal to him sooner or later. Next, I am going to describe another group of entities existing in the mental sphere, namely the group of the phantoms or phantasms. The difference between larva and phantom is as follows. A larva is quite unconsciously adopting a shape in the mental sphere, appropriate to the motive of a single or a repeated psychical emotion, whereas a phantom accepts a certain form originating in the fantasy of man. Exactly in the same way as it happens to be with the larvae, the phantom is likewise reinforced, revived and animated by the repeated evocation of the picture, regardless of whatever the matter might be, and it will be capable or influencing not only the mental or astral plane but also the material level. Two examples may serve to illustrate this topic. A very remarkable example is the so-called magic persecution mania, which I shall describe from 2 points of view with reference to the phantoms. There are certain human beings with an innate scowl or the demoniacal features and whose outward appearance consequently gives the impression of black magicians, but who probably have not the faintest idea of any human science, to say nothing of magic at all. It is sufficient for any easily suggestible, emotionally excitable, or rather conceited person to meet with such a type of man, whether in business or in personal concern, and our test subject, as we shall call it, will instantly have the sensation of a strong dislike and antipathy towards the antagonist. It can happen now that our type is exhibiting a whimsical behaviour without wanting to do so, nor even knowing about it. The first thought entering the test subject's mind will be that he is facing a black magician. Maybe, for some reason or the other, this test person is not thinking too highly of this type of man, and the first step towards self-suggestion has already been done. Sooner or later, small, awkward, everyday incidents will occur. The test person will occur the test person is met with, will occur too. The cause of these incidents will never be cleared up, but the blame for them will simply be set on our type of man. From now, the attention is stirred up. One is watching oneself, and the picture of the type becomes more distinct. There's my bookmark. Oh, there it is. Distinct. One begins already feeling persecuted. The eyes grow more glittering. His appearance reveals itself in dreams. The picture becomes more vivid, emerges eventually even in broad daylight, and finally one does constantly live under the impression of being persecuted at every turn. With the help of a very lively imagination, the picture can be condensed to such a degree that it becomes visible even to other similarly sensitive persons. Feeling persecuted in this manner, our test person may be argued into anything, even the worst, the picture continually working on his mind. He is looking for help, begins to pray, and does his best to scare away this terrible influence. He gets a nervous breakdown, becomes gradually insane, and ends up, whether by committing suicide or else, in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. The phantom has fulfilled its task. How terrific is the shock, however, if such a spirit must convince itself in the mental sphere that it has been committing a well-organised magic suicide. What a bitter disappointment. Our type man, of course, has not the faintest idea of what's happened. Indeed, and never will he realise that he was nothing else but a means to an end. Drink break. Don't spill it on the book. Oh. Oh. Thirsty work reading. His face, his conduct were only the form, the pattern from which our test subject created the destructive being, the phantom whose victim he became in the end. Such and similar sad examples do happen more frequently than you would believe, sometimes faster, more drastically, in other cases more slowly, furtively, insidiously. But should you dare to tell such a persecuted person the truth, he would never believe it, because the phantom knows well how to hinder its victims from escaping. If the divine providence's guiding hand leads such an unhappy, persecuted person to a genuine magician who is finding out the phantom's trickery, he will face a very difficult task to convince the victim, to lead him the right path, and to teach him a different, normal mode of thinking. At certain times, especially if the victim is completely under the spell of a phantom, the helper will have to interfere very firmly, indeed now and again even drastically, to restore the mental balance of the individual. The second example shows the same occurrence, but with a different motive underlying. We have to deal here with a phantom of eroticism. The birth of such a phantom, if one may use the expression of birth at all, takes place in the face, the beautiful body of a living person. Sometimes only a photo, a pornographic illustration or something similar, with the purpose to provoke the lust, the sexual instinct, regardless of the person belonging to the female or the male sex. Provided anyone being in love have no opportunity at all of satisfying his personal longing, the stronger and the more vehement this yearning will grow. The stronger will, at the same time, the phantom's insinuations become, because it is thriving entirely on thoughts of yearning. The more the concerned person is trying to resist this unsatisfied love, the more obtrusive the phantom will become. At first it will turn up in dreams and allow his victim to reveal in the most delightful transport of love. A little later it will provoke the sexual instinct and allow sexual intercourse in the victim's dreams. The pollutions produced in this way help the phantom to become denser and to influence the victim more and more, because the sperm is so representing the concentrated vital power which the phantom is sucking up like a vampire. The point in question here is not the material sperm, but the animal vital power accumulated in the sperm. The victim is losing the ground under his feet. His willpower is diminishing, and the phantom gradually wins the upper hand. If fate is not so kind to such a one as to have him enlightened in good time and to find the right distraction for him, the phantom's mode of attraction will result in more dangerous effects. The person becomes confused, stops eating, the nerves are overexcited, and such like. The love phantom can be condensed to such a degree by unsatisfied passion that it can adopt bodily forms, seducing his victim to onanism and other artificial stimulation of the genital organs. Onanism. Thousands of people have fallen victims of phantoms by committing suicide as the result of disappointment in love or unsatisfied passion. This problem recalls the remembrance of true occurrences of the medieval incubi and succubi and the trials of witchcraft connected therewith. A very dangerous pleasure indeed. In the light of the two foregoing instances, the magician may observe the activity of the phantoms, and he will be able to form such spectres himself. But do not forget, sooner or later, he always will run the risk of being influenced or mastered by them. He knows what is happening in the normal, average individual and how to produce these phantasms consciously in a magic way, but never will he be induced to execute such practices himself, always remembering the magic sentence. Love is the law, but love under a strong will. Where have we heard that before? There is one theme left to be described, that one of the phantasms or shadows. Phantasms are animate presentations of people already deceased. I will pay particular attention to this theme to avoid many errors and enable everybody to sift the chaff from the wheat. As soon as a human being is leaving behind the mortal frame, it is at once in the fourth state of aggregation, usually called the world beyond. Without any mediating substance, it is impossible for a being to operate on our tri-dimensional sphere. Just as a fish cannot swim without water, the same thing prevails to beings already passed away to the world beyond. Remembering, praising, mourning the deceased, any memory of or tribute to them will create and enliven imaginary pictures of the dead, which, as a result of frequent repetition, have rather a long duration. Rather a long duration of life. We call these pictures created by the living ones phantoms. It is this kind of phantom which manifests. It is these kinds of phantoms which manifest themselves in great numbers to the so-called spiritualists, evokers, diviners, etc. The spooks and hobgoblins also are nothing else but phantoms preserving, condensing and thriving on the affection and attachment of the bereaved ones, as it happens in the case of the shadows. This can be stated without difficulties by citing in different places at the same minute a being which manifests itself in all directions at once through the so-called mediums, which means nothing else but a manifestation of the dead person's phantom, because phantoms can be created by hundreds. It is very sad that these phantoms are always mistaken for the real dead persons by the spiritualistic mediums. A lot of mischief, self-deception and fraudulence is carried out just in this line. One can observe, for instance, that one of the mediums is communicating with a famous leader or general, a second one with an artist, another with a saint, on a different plane with a pharaoh, and immediately again with an angel. Therefore, it is not surprising at all that this particular field of knowledge will meet with an host of opponents and mockers because of its amount of self-deception. No wonder that a phantom has such a strong instinct of self-preservation as to present itself as a vampire to the medium or the whole circle, and becomes indeed fatal to the nearest neighbourhood as well. All this does not mean, of course, that a genuine magician who is mastering the fourth state of aggregation, that is, the Akasha principle, would not be capable of taking up a communication with a deceased person or with an intellect not yet embodied. I have quoted the practice already in the chapter about the mediumistic writing. Apart from that, any magician is able to form a housing, a shape, with the help of the imagination, transferring it in the fourth state of aggregation, and to persuade or even force the true desired being to enter this form and manifest itself to the external world. This practice belongs to the field of necromancy or conjuring magic, and has nothing at all to do with the generally known spiritualism. The genuine magician will use this practice in extreme cases only, and he will not evoke a being away from its sphere, because anything a being of the fourth state of aggregation has to say or to fulfill in the material or astral world can be achieved by the magician himself through his maturity likewise. Summary of all exercises. Step 6. 1. Magic mental training. 1. Mediation on the own spirit. 2. Becoming conscious of the senses in the spirit. 2. Magic psychic training. 1. Preparation to master the Akasha principle. 2. Deliberate induction to trance with the help of Akasha. 3. Mastering of the elements with the help of an individual ritual from the Akasha posture. 3. Magic physical training. 1. Deliberate creation of beings. A. Elementals. B. Larvae. C. Phantoms, in brackets shadows. D. Phantoms. End of step 6. Very interesting.